Did Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer save their jobs with a win over Tampa Bay? We'll discuss that and more on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are breaking down the Cowboys' Week 16 win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But, Landon, I want to start with this. On Friday, when we were previewing this game, we said this is a game that if Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer win, it's going to go a long way in securing their jobs for 2025. Do you still believe that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we talked about the fact that the Cowboys obviously had won 4 or 5 games, or was it, 3 or 4 games, and including, a real heartbreaker to the Cincinnati Bengals. And that, this was kind of a step up from that, right? Like this was a team that is still in the race for the playoffs, very much needed this game to win. And just a team that's in a kind of different echelon than the guys that you had been playing these last few weeks. So this game had represented a step up in competition, a step up in difficulty, especially considering all the things that the Cowboys have been dealing with, this season. This was one of the more difficult games the Cowboys are going to face. And I think, this was the kind of result that I had in mind when we started talking like this, right? That this was, if the Cowboys were able to find a way to grind out a gritty win against a team that needed it certainly more than the Cowboys did, I think that that's a good sign of solid coaching happening on some level, that being able to motivate and kind of strategically get your team to a place where you can beat a desperate team that needs a win in order to get to the playoffs. I think it shows a lot in an ability of a coach, but I also think it shows a lot in the influence that the coaching staff has over their players and how much motivation they're able to get out of this. I mean, look, we can argue a lot about the prudence of Mike McCarthy coming back and whether what that means when this team is at full strength and what that means when this team is in the playoffs and at the moments that we actually want to judge this team for. I think that those are all conversations we can have, but I think one thing we can't argue is whether or not this team, as it's currently constructed, wants Mike McCarthy to come back as the head coach, because it seems like they're fighting and playing in such a way that they clearly do.
I want to discuss whether we think he should come back or not, but there are a lot of reasons that I would like him to come back. We've seen what bad coaches look like here in Dallas, and I think the last coach was a bad example. I was actually talking about this on Twitter on Monday. We've seen before, like during the Jason Garrett era, you could have 10 of 11 healthy starters, but Tyron Smith just doesn't play, and all of a sudden your offense can't score a touchdown. And that's with like a healthy Dak, a healthy Tony Romo. Meanwhile, we have an offense with no quarterback. You've got undrafted free agents across the offensive line. You're rotating tackles in. Your number one receiver has a bad shoulder injury, and you're still putting up 26 points a game. I believe over the last 5 weeks, they're averaging like 27 points per game. That's just a small indicator of what like a solid coach in the NFL can do. They can be floor raisers. Are there other coaches out there that could potentially have a higher ceiling than McCarthy? Absolutely. I just have doubts that the Cowboys would actually be interested in some of those coaches.
That may be true. And I think that should be part of the conversation, right? Is that like, we should keep in mind, like, I mean, who the Cowboys are actually going to consider in this. And I think if you don't, then you're kind of being unrealistic in trying to evaluate, who the next head coach is. I'll add in another thing too, is I think, there's been a lot of discussion about the kind of inability by the McCarthy offenses to get going early and get started early, or slow starts to these teams in season wide, right? Like, it seems like it takes a little bit while to figure out what's going on. I think a good portion of that has to do the fact that this team is good with playing with backups, and the fact that the team kind of starts out slow early in the season are not unrelated. I'll put it that way. I think that it has to do with the fact that McCarthy understands that in order to win later on in the season, in order to kind of get through the injury situations that you face throughout the year, you have to play a lot of young players, and playing a lot of young players early in the season is dangerous, right? Because they're not experienced. They don't have the wealth of knowledge, the experience to kind of know not to do this or to do that, or to take an adjustment, and it can cause problems. And I think that's kind of part of the meal with Mike McCarthy, right? Is that, like, you have to understand that there might be some early mishaps by some of the young players on your team that are getting a lot of snaps, because you need them to ingest and get all that experience early on, so that by the end of the year, when you need them to step in and play larger roles, they're ready for that. So I think that there is some criticism about the way that this team started, and I think that's fair. I certainly think that it started way worse than we all anticipated. That wasn't the plan. What happened? But I do think that is in part due to the fact that one of the things that Mike McCarthy is special with is playing younger players and the ability to rotate guys in, and part of the sacrifice of that is having to play guys who may not quite be ready for prime time early in the season.
So we still have 2 games left in the season, but as of right now, how are you leaning in terms of bringing back Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer? Would you like to see them just have a clean slate and go through interviews and hire other guys? Should they just give McCarthy an extension? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it has to do with what's realistic. Like, in my heart of hearts, my number one choice is go get Ben Johnson and let's see what happens with the new group. I mean, but I don't know that that's realistic, right? Like, I don't know that that's like something that the Cowboys are going to be doing.
How do you even know if it's realistic? Because the reason I ask that is because I don't think you can go out and interview Ben Johnson, right, if Mike McCarthy doesn't have a contract, right? Like, that would be really weird optics, right? So you either have to say, hey, we're not bringing back McCarthy and we're going to do interviews with Ben Johnson and some of these other guys, or do you just not wait around and you just bring back Mike McCarthy?
Well, that's the thing, right? Is no matter what, the Cowboys should make their decision soon, because, like, either make the decision to lean into McCarthy and let's move forward with that, or fire Mike McCarthy and let's get to interviewing folks, right? Let's start, getting transition, because I think that, whether this was, and this is a whole other conversation, whether this was on purpose or not, I feel like the Cowboys dragged their feet a lot last season in order to kind of delay the decision until the point where there wasn't much of a decision, right? Like, there wasn't really any coaches still available. They dragged their feet to the point where I guess we're bringing Mike back. I don't know how that happened. Like it wasn't all part of their design or something. I just think that, if the Cowboys are serious about moving on from Mike McCarthy, they're probably going to need to do so soon. And if they're not, then, then likely I wouldn't be shocked if we just didn't hear anything for a long time. And then suddenly, they quietly make a decision after we've all kind of internalized and accepted the fact that Mike McCarthy is going to be the head coach next year, because the Cowboys didn't do anything to fire him at the end of the year. And then suddenly
they don't have to fire him, though. Like, he is a free agent. That's the other thing. They're going to have to either give him a new deal or start interviewing candidates. And I just think once you've made the decision to start interviewing other candidates, McCarthy's gone.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what I'm saying, I guess, is that they need to, no matter what, even if this deal is done, they have to make the decision now, right? Yeah. They have to make the decision, like, okay, he's not coming back and we're interviewing guys. Like, it's not like, if they slow play this and we're not hearing anything, that means that they are quietly re-signing a deal with Mike McCarthy and they're not interviewing any other coaches, right?
So I'll also point this out. If the longer that McCarthy is a free agent, I wouldn't be surprised with so many other coaching gigs available. What if some of these other teams just like, hey, McCarthy's better than what we got. Why don't we? He hasn't signed a deal with Dallas yet. Why don't we go out and offer him a massive deal?
Well, and that's the other interesting part about the whole Mike McCarthy thing is that, I think part of what would make you and I feel better, I'd certainly make me feel better about doing this, is if the Cowboys were able to kind of leverage some of this into getting convincing Mike McCarthy. We talked about this, to get another play caller in here, to get some of the kind of offensive mind here. I don't know that Mike McCarthy feels any need to be leveraged over anything.
No.
He won 36 games in 3 years for this team, and then say what you want about how this team played this year. I certainly think he could still use this season's disaster of injuries as a kind of positive on his resume if he was pitching it to another team. So I don't know that the Cowboys are going to have any kind of leverage to get anything they want out of Mike McCarthy. You're going to have to get a Mike McCarthy that may even, if he comes back, may even have more say over things that you don't want. So
I just want to point out, the longer that it goes, the more opportunities for chaos, because McCarthy is going to want to coach next year. If we're into the third week of January and he still doesn't have a deal, and Chicago is offering to make him the third highest paid coach in the league and compare him with Caleb Williams, McCarthy might feel like, hey, I don't want to wait around. I'm just going to go take this job right now. You guys could have offered me a deal 2 weeks ago. You decided not to. Again, I'm not saying the Cowboys have to bring Mike McCarthy back, but I do think they have to make a decision either way rather quickly. Like within a week of the season ending, you better know what your plan is.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly maybe Cowboys fans who may not hate that scenario where the Cowboys wait too long and suddenly McCarthy's gone.
Right, which again, I understand. It's just that you have to, you can't wait around and hope whatever thing. There's no benefit in waiting here.
Yeah, exactly. Whether you want to keep him or not, you should make a decision soon. And then move with it and make an announcement, and then let's go working towards it. Because again, just to reiterate, I do think that the problem last year, and whether this was by design or not, who knows? The problem was last year they dragged their feet entirely too long with this whole thing and waited entirely too long. And then suddenly, especially because he was under contract at that point, you couldn't really interview anybody, you couldn't deal with anybody, and it wasn't like realistic that the Cowboys were even going to change coaches at that point.
All right, let's talk about the actual game and a couple players that stood out, starting at linebacker. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, and I know the Cowboys won't be making it, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many different ways that you can pick up a W this year, whether that's betting on the awards, who's going to make the playoffs. There's still some divisions that are out there that have to be decided, including the NFC East. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are breaking down the Cowboys' Week 16 win over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Atlanta, let's talk about a couple players that performed well, including Marist Liufau, who got the start with Eric Kendricks out, with DeMarvion Overshown out. I kind of thought he was one of their best defensive players on Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't think it was a surprise to anybody when saw that Kendricks wasn't going to be playing, that it was Liufau that was going to get the green dot. There's just been a lot of talk about how much he's kind of internalized this defense, really understands things. He's making all the checks and all the calls and practices. And then on top of that, when he gets onto the field, he's playing really well. He's creating plays. He's not just an afterthought. He's pressing the issue. He's been a really good pressure player, especially moving forward. He's good at taking on blocks. He's been a solid tackler. I think what we heard a lot from the coaching staff, early after the draft and then the early parts of training camp and OTAs, about the kind of player that Liufau was, we started to see a little bit of that on the field now, right? You started to see him kind of take advantage of and obviously the timing could not be better. With Overshown out, you needed him to kind of step in against a team like this that had a couple of talented running backs. So for him to kind of step up and make have the game that he did against the opponent he did, I think was really telling. And I think the other part of it is that he's not only missing Overshown next to him, he was having to play with Nick Vigil, who I think also played a very good game, but still is not quite, the talent level of Overshown or
Well, Vigil
of
never practices. I don't know if you saw the stat from
Yeah,
Todd Archer.
yeah,
He has not had a week where he's missed. He's not had a week of practice where he hasn't missed a practice since week 5. Like he's
yeah,
always been in and out because he's been dealing with a foot injury.
foot injury. Yeah.
Liufau has been having to play. He was the green dot player in this game. He performed pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I just think that it's if anybody who's been following the Cowboys for a little while have been listening to what the coach is saying, this isn't too shocking because he's been someone that they have mentioned over and over and over again as a guy that is just someone who it's not too big for him. He's ready to step in and play the role. And again, like it's not even just that he's kind of stepping in and doing everything correctly and being a guy that understands the defense. He's making plays. He's causing fumbles. He's
Back-to-back weeks for the fourth fumble.
Absolutely, and just really pressing the issue and being a positive player, not just a guy that's out there as well. I got another guy I want to throw in there just because
I got another one. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm afraid that we're going to start losing him. We're going to lose him soon, and it's Chauncey Golson. I think that again another week where he comes in and plays like a starter level. Strong on the outside. He also had a sack in this game. Just really strong at the point of attack. Was just a guy that we've kind of now like just folded him into this list of guys that we expect to play very solid football every single week. But he developed into that guy over a series of years. So I just wanted to point out, rewatching the game last night, he had a couple of different really, really good snaps that I thought were very impressive. So I just wanted to make sure that we're throwing his name out while we still can, for sure.
I got another one I want to mention. This one's a much harder conversation. I wanted to mention Deron Bland because he had a really tough assignment. He basically covered Mike Evans in this entire game. Bland's been really good since he's come back from the injury. Now, he hasn't had the interceptions totals that he had last year, but I thought general, I think he's been very consistent. And one of the things that we said when the Cowboys gave Trayvon Diggs the extension is that we're going to know probably 2 years after Diggs' extension who they want to keep long-term. And just after watching the last couple of weeks, and I know Diggs has a really serious injury, but I think I want Bland long-term on this team. I just think he's younger. He tackles better. He's got a little bit more position flexibility. He's the type of corner that I don't really want to lose. In a lot of ways where he's got the dog mentality in him that Jordan Lewis has. And I just think I want more of those type of guys in my secondary.
Yeah. I mean, he's just been a guy that, has quietly done his job extremely well. I mean, obviously, when he was an all-pro and he was pick sixing and he broke the record, that was kind of the anomaly that we didn't really know was there. But I mean, outside of that, before all that hoopla and hype and all that stuff, he was just a guy who was very solid at his job, good in coverage, just didn't allow a bunch of catches, could make tackles. Like you said, it's just a football player who was really good. He could, came into the league as a good cover guy, which is a pretty rare trait to have coming into the league. So, I don't disagree. I think that if given our druthers and we have a choice, and obviously
they will
money, there's some money and some contract stuff that is going to make everything about that complicated. But I think given my choice, I like Diggs a lot, and I think Diggs can be a playmaker. But as far as down to down, who's the more solid of the two players, I think there's an argument to be made that it might be Bland.
Now, the Cowboys don't have to make that decision this offseason because Bland still has a year left on his deal. Yeah. But if you want to get ahead of things a little bit and not have all these contracts continue to get in the last years of the deal, maybe you sign him now and maybe you figure out something to do with that Trayvon contract. I just think the future of this Cowboys cornerback room should be Deron Bland, Jordan Lewis. Maybe you hope Kalen Carson or Josh Butler develops as another guy, but I don't like the idea of losing Bland. I just think he's too good of a player.
Yeah, I agree. And I think he just does a little bit of everything very well. And just it makes him more versatile of a player, a little bit maybe a better fit no matter what defense you're playing, you know.
Well, and
So
remember, he's coming off a major foot injury, and you really wouldn't notice it. Like, I think he's looked pretty good since he's come back to the lineup.
yeah, I think the thing too with that is that there was a lot of kind of back and forth on when he was coming back, and they kind of really slow rolled it, and they one thing, and then they kind of waited a couple of weeks, and he was a healthy practice participant, but didn't kind of get into the game for a little bit. But yeah, now that he's been in for a couple of weeks, he's looked like he hasn't missed a beat. He's played very solid football. That play where he ripped the ball away and the fumble recovery was just that's
Ridiculous.
just a ridiculous strong play against a rookie who was over physical. So yeah, just a really solid play, and just generally very solid play from Deron Bland so far this season.
All right, let's talk about some end of season scenarios for the Cowboys. We know they're not going to be in the postseason, but where could they be drafting? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you love watching the game, you're going to love PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy. Whether it's football, basketball, or any of your favorite sports, PrizePicks makes your holidays bigger and brighter. You can now win up to 1,000 times your money on PrizePicks. Plus, this holiday season, they're giving away over $30 million in rewards during Picksmas and offering 2 free picks in December. And when your picks hit, PrizePicks makes it easy to cash out. You can get your money in as fast as 15 minutes. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions that you forgot about, or maybe that you were paying twice? I know that happened to me. Sometimes my wife gets some of these weird subscriptions that I don't even know about. Rocket Money helped me find them and eliminate them. Rocket Money has made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 each year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That is rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. Available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, later. Let's talk about some end of season scenarios. The Cowboys finished the season against the Eagles on the road, and then at home against Washington. The record is 7-8. You tell me what you think their final record is going to be, and I'll tell you where they're probably going to draft.
All right, I think I wouldn't be shocked if the Cowboys managed to pull one of these 2 games out. All right, so let's say they finish up 1-1, so they end up with an 8 and 9. Is it 8-9? Right, 8-9.
Yeah,
8-9 result.
So if they finish at 8-9, they're probably going to draft 14th or 15th. Some of this depends on like the Bengals. If the Bengals beat the Broncos next weekend, the Cowboys are going to be drafting inside the top 14, regardless of what they do. It's just a matter of motivation for the Eagles and the Commanders, right? If Dallas beats Philadelphia next week, Washington will have everything to play for in week 18 because they can still win the NFC East. But if Philadelphia beats Dallas, week 18 might not matter for Washington. They'll be locked into a wild card spot. The only thing there is they might be fighting to be the 6th seed. And I do think the 6th seed has a lot of value compared to the 7th seed because the 7th seed is going to play either Detroit or Philadelphia, while the 6th seed will probably play the Rams. And that's just a much, much different game.
All right, let's say that Nick Sirianni has kidnapped the cognitive specialist for the Eagles and hidden him in a ice shack somewhere during the week, and Jalen Hurts manages to clear protocols thanks you to Dr. Nick Sirianni, MD, clearing him. Let's say the Cowboys lose both of those games. What does it look like at that point?
So I asked somebody at ESPN to run some simulations for us just to see where they would be at. In 60% of their simulations, the Cowboys finished with either the 12th or the 13th pick if they lose both games. There's an outside chance they could get the 11th pick, but more than likely you're going to be drafting at 12 or 13. And that's why a lot of people that are complaining, like, hey, look how much this win cost the Cowboys. It might have cost you like 1 or 2 spots. Like, that's it. Like,
At this point, the Cowboys are picking outside of the top 10, though. It
yeah,
seems like
there's almost no scenario where they would pick inside the top 10.
okay. Let's talk about the obviously absolute worst case scenario for, frankly, everybody involved in the NFC East, where the Cowboys, well, maybe not for the Giants. I don't think that they count for anything anymore. Let's say the Cowboys somehow manage away. Let's say they beat Philly. And Washington, despite wanting to win the NFC East, they can't get over the juggernaut that is the Cooper Rush led Cowboys. What happens at that point? Are we picking 32nd or what's going on?
The absolute worst case scenario is that they would draft 18th. That's the last spot that you would be, assuming that you don't make the playoffs, right? They're not going to get there because teams like Tampa Bay and Seattle both just have easy games and they're going to get to 9 wins, right? Arizona, I think, even has a chance to get to 9-8, and they would be drafting ahead of the Cowboys, behind the Cowboys because of their strength of schedule. It's really hard, even if the Cowboys were to win out, to envision them drafting anywhere lower than 16. Like, that's pretty much their floor. So between 11 and 16, it's why I'm not going to stress out too much about these last couple of games. Like, if they win both and they finish the season at 9-8 after everything that happened this year with all the injuries, and they still have a winning record, that'd be pretty freaking cool. Like, I know you don't make the playoffs. I think it's pretty likely they go 7-10 and you're picking at 12, 13. It's whatever. This is not a strong draft class. You still can get a really good player though at 12 or 13.
It really would be too bad if the Cowboys were able to like win these last 2 games. And if the Cowboys fandom was not like on board with that, or you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it would be upsetting to like for the Cowboys to kind of fight back through all what they have had to fight back and to, come away with this season with a winning record, and for the fans to be disappointed with that. I hope that if the Cowboys do manage to kind of pull something like that off, I understand draft pick. I understand all that stuff.
I don't care. I honestly,
yeah,
exactly. If they get to 9-8, that is a heck of an accomplishment considering all the. Honestly, you tip your cap to Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer for not letting this thing get really bad like it has for some other teams, 49ers. That's what I'm rooting for. Like, I think 9-8 would show you the kind of culture they've had. And Landon, we've seen some teams in recent years finish the season really strong, like Detroit, and use that positive momentum to carry it into the offseason, to carry into next year. Not saying that's always going to happen, but I do think it could be very beneficial for this team.
I mean, there's something to the idea. Look, if you want to believe that Green Bay loss was a hangover to the Cowboys in the next season, or that Super Bowl losses can be hangovers for the teams in the next season, I mean, I think it's reasonable to think, wow, look at all the adversity that we faced by the end of that year, and we finished as strong as we did. Imagine what could happen if the ball bounces our way a couple times next year. Yeah, and I think that could be a real great starting off point, as opposed to trying to fight the demons of proving something wrong, or trying to fight the results of something that happened the season before, which can kind of hang over you a little bit. So I do think that there's something to the idea of building and taking some positive momentum at the end of the year and bringing it to the next season.
I also never want the Cowboys to be considered a losing franchise in the way that, like, the Giants are now, or the Jets, or the Browns, where losing is just expected and it's part of the deal when it comes to the franchise. If the Cowboys can figure out a way to get to 8-9, again, I know that's a losing season, but to salvage the year, be respectable, I do think that goes a long ways. And I do think players across the league recognize that. Like, you think of some of these franchises like Chicago, Cleveland, both New York teams, where it's, hey, that's just what kind of happens. Like, it's really hard to win there. You don't ever want to be in that situation, even if it means you get a top 3, top 4 draft pick.
Yeah, and I just think that the there's something to the idea of the mentality of the players on your team and the belief in the organization that I think has an unseen effect on the abilities of these teams,
Yes.
especially early in the season the next year.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. We will be back on Thursday with a crossover edition of the Locked On Cowboys podcast, taking Christmas Day off. Make sure you download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you right back here on Thursday.